I'm attorney Mark Nicholson from the law office of Mark Nicholson, and I'm here with
Sarah.
Okay. And she's going to ask some questions regarding what happens after someone is convicted of a crime. Go ahead.
Right. So I'm basically wanting to know like the differences between all of the options you have after a conviction, like expungements, post-conviction relief, appeals, modifications, stuff like that.
Okay, you've asked a lot of questions
Sorry.
in there, so let's break it down one
Okay,
at a time.
okay.
So go ahead and ask one question, and I'll
Okay.
try to answer that, so that way it makes it easier for the people that are watching.
Yes. Okay. So what is an expungement?
Okay, basically what an expungement is when someone is potentially convicted of a crime and they wait a certain period of time. I'll just give a brief summary, won't go through all the details. And they are allowed to get it expunged, removed from their criminal record. Also, someone could be arrested for a crime, and if they're arrested and they're not convicted, that can be removed from their criminal history. Or a case could get dismissed, and that could be removed from their criminal history. So it just depends. Not everything is eligible for an expungement, but Indiana does have the expungement statute, and there are certain crimes that are eligible for expungement if you are convicted. And however, if you're not convicted, because you're either the case is not guilty or it's automatically dismissed because the prosecutor is just for whatever reason, or they just choose not to press charges against you even though you were arrested, those can be expunged from the record. Okay?
Okay, cool. So I thought that was something that you had to like be convicted for.
You not necessarily
Okay.
for something that gets expunged. You can be, like I said, it can be a dismissal. It can be found. You can be found not guilty, or it could be a situation where the prosecutors decline to prosecute, and so you're never even charged with a crime, but you were arrested.
Yes.
And in that case, let me back up a little bit. In that particular case, if you're not really charged with a crime, there's nothing really for them to dismiss if you're not really charged with the crime. So there has to be some kind of charge for them
Yes.
to kind of have that, like a dismiss or a expungement.
Yes, and this would completely remove it from the CCS, correct?
Well, what CCS is, that's chronological case
Yes.
summary, and it, depending on the type of case it is, it could remove it from the chronological case summary. So someone can't go to mycase.in.gov and remove it, and see it, but there are some that are kind of sealed from the public that will say that they've been expunged. So some of them will show that they have been expunged, depending on the level of the type of crime.
Okay, that makes sense. So the next one would be PCRs, so post-conviction relief.
So with a post-conviction relief, with that you definitely have to be convicted. It's even in the title of the name. It says post-conviction relief. So with that, basically, you're convicted of the crime, and then you go have your appeal, which we'll talk about. You maybe try to transfer to the Supreme Court. That's denied. And then the only remedy you have left is what's called post-conviction relief. And what that is ineffective assistance of counsel is one of the allegations you have to make, or you can say newly discovered conviction relief. And the three grounds are ineffective assistance of counsel, what we call IAC, and then also you can have newly discovered evidence where after years or maybe even decades of being in prison, DNA evidence turns up, or someone comes up and confesses to the crime. And then that could be some kind of newly discovered evidence. And with that, it can also be actual innocence, where somehow, like I said, if someone confesses to the crime, or this evidence that comes forward may also show that you're actually innocent of the crime, and that would be considered newly discovered evidence and also actual innocence, and those would be two grounds that you would be able to raise on what's called a PCR.
Okay, and then the next thing would be a modification.
So sentence modification, that's one where you have to be convicted of a crime. And with that, you will file a motion with the court asking that they modify your sentence. These usually are not applicable if you were convicted by a plea agreement, because normally if it's a plea agreement and you've agreed to the terms of this plea agreement, you agreed that, hey, I will do 5 years in prison, normally they won't put a provision in there for you to be able to modify that. So the plea agreement is like a contract. So it's usually a modification is if you were an open plea agreement, or you go to trial and you get convicted and the judge sentences you, you may be able to file a modification depending on the type of case it is. I won't go into all the details that qualify you for a modification, but you could possibly modify it, and you have to be convicted of the crime for there to be a modification of your sentence.
Okay, and then appeals.
And appeals is really one of the first steps you would do if you're convicted of a crime, which is in Indiana, you have a constitutional right to do a direct appeal. So you would appeal it to the Indiana Court of Appeals. And then if you lose in the Court of Appeals, you can ask for a transfer to the Indiana Supreme Court. And they take very few cases, but Indiana Court of Appeals has to take all cases that are criminal appeals because Indiana, like I said, you have a constitutional right to an appeal. So if you want to appeal, whether it's a criminal case or a civil case, you can go ahead and appeal the judge's decision or the jury's decision if they find you guilty of a crime, and you can do an appeal.
Okay, yeah, and I think that was it, those 4.
All right, awesome. So we just went over what is an expungement. We also talked about what is a PCR and modification and also an appeal. Yes. So those are just a brief summary, general overview of those 4 things. If you want more detail, obviously you can visit my website, marknicholsonlaw.com, and go to the blog, the legal blog called The Nicholson Nugget, and you can always call our office if you need some legal help. Thank you.